Hi, I'm Todd Rheingold, the Hopeful Aspirant. Welcome to another installment of I Got a Testimony. Last week I interviewed Bobbie Bagley, and she gave us her testimony about how she got involved in her walk with the Lord. Last week she spoke very passionately about the interconnectedness of her religious faith and her commitment to helping those in her community as well as abroad. This week's episode, we drilled down a little bit more on her ministry work overseas. I hope you've been enjoying these installments of I Got a Testimony. For those of you who are interested, please go to my website, thehopefulaspirant.com. There you can download my recent book, The Hopeful Aspirant, My Journey of Faith. It's a 170-page spiritual memoir of my 30-year journey with the Lord and the Holy Spirit, all the ups and downs. I think you'll find it pretty interesting reading. So be sure to check it out, thehopefulaspirant.com. All of these broadcasts on Preach the Word Network are on my YouTube channel. So please go to the YouTube channel. I have about 15 videos there right now of past episodes, and you can look it up under my name, Todd Rheingold, or you can look it up under The Hopeful Aspirant. That's Aspirant. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy this week's episode.
There's nothing wrong with religion, but it needs to really focus on that relationship, with God, because that's what draws us closer to one another, as human beings, as people, because God created us in His image, and He created us, with a loving heart for us to really push back that love out towards one another. And so a lot of the work, and I still consider myself doing a lot of ministry work now, not so much that I have to have a title to do that. And no one, who walks in a relationship with God has to have a title of being a minister or a pastor, or deacon or any position like that. But just understanding that God allowed for all of us to be here to be in service to one another, and all the gifts that He gives us. The gift that you have, Todd, is the gift that's given to you to be in service to someone else or to a group of folks. And that's the thing, now that I really try to emphasize, in my life, as a healthcare professional, is that this gift that I have is for someone else. And all of us have been given gifts, and all of us have those gifts to be a part of a ministry in service to one another. And some people have the gifts in singing. Some people have it through their profession as a medical person. Some people have it in their profession as teachers. But we all have something that we can give back, to others. And so my mission work is not done, right? And so I see it in the work that I do now, as a director of a public health department, to be there for the staff that I work with, to be in service to the community, to be in service to other stakeholders, to government officials. It's what I do. And my goal is to do this, to the utmost in representation of, honoring God and honoring the gift that God gave me, to be in this life, and to love. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters the most, is that we love one another.
It is for us to have compassion towards one another. As
Yeah.
you said, God is the one who judges. God is the one who says y'all should have repented. That is not for us to say. We are not God. We are His servants. Nobody intends on being poor, and nobody intends on being unhappy, and nobody intends on being unhealthy. So when someone kind of accuses them, when they're already being victimized by their decisions, and then somebody comes along and they're very cavalier and they say, shouldn't have been smoking. Okay, they shouldn't have been smoking, but this is not the time.
Yeah.
When they're crying about having cancer and dying, this is not the time for you to lord it over them. And pun intended, it's not the time for you to lord it over them. If you could speak to a specific type of mission where you really, like, kind of like what you said earlier when you first encountered God on personally, to give me an example, if you can, of the missionary work where you really saw God show up, like, whoa, I'm like really witnessing this right here, right now.
We've had over the years, Todd, we had the opportunity to be in, a lot of places where you could really see, the Spirit of God just moving. One person that I did think about was Nicholas. I met Nicholas when I went to Kenya the first time. That was back in 1991, so that was a while ago, almost 20 some odd years ago. And the thing with Nicholas is that when I met him, I led him to Christ, in Kenya. And probably about, so we're now what, 2 years out from that. So Keith was doing some work in South Africa and in Kenya. And don't you know that he ended up encountering Nicholas? Like 20 some odd years, 20, in fact, it was 27 years later, he encounters Nicholas.
Wow.
And Nicholas remembered, and always, it kept in his heart close. He calls me mom. And, he remembered his transformation, his, being led to Christ, what and how the Lord had, rescued him. And 27 years later, met Keith. And then we ended up going back to Kenya and reconnecting, with him, as a result of what God had done in his life, and started another cycle of ministry with these guys over in Kenya now. And I'm not sure if Keith actually talked about that when you had him on the show, but that reconnection was made. But that's just how God does things. When I think about like some transformative things that have happened, a lot of it has been just wherever we were, where I would actually see somebody's countenance just like totally change as they gave their life over to the Lord. You could almost like, it's almost like this. You would see just that change, like a hand wave over their face, and the countenance would lighten up, right? And so it's just God doing his thing wherever we are. And when we allow for ourselves to be used, God does his thing. When we allow for the Spirit of God to move, God's going to do his thing. Mm-hmm. And God has said, I don't need you because I can make rocks cry out. But why would we allow for rocks to cry out when it could be us? Why would we allow for something else to do, God's bidding, and allow for the glory of God to shine through anything else except for us? Right. And so, my testimony, is really about allowing for God to just do the things that he does. I remember someone saying to me, Todd, years and years and years ago, when I first got saved, and they would say stuff like, just your smile alone. Now, can you imagine, the Spirit of God moving in us in that powerful way, that just our smile would change a person's heart or change their life?
Yeah.
But it's got to be something that's done, with faith behind it.
Absolutely.
And I've had that testimony come from folks even recently here. I met a homeless woman who was on the street, and I just smiled and said hello to her. And you know what she did, Todd? She started crying. She started crying because she said, that I actually acknowledged that she was there. Right. And that's what God allows for us to do, allow for us to connect to other people. And I gave her a hug. But that's, again, that connection that God allows for us to make with people.
Right.
Just recognizing that they're not walking past people and ignoring that they're there. That changed that woman's life for just that moment. She didn't ask me for money, Todd. Mm-hmm. She didn't ask me for food. She didn't ask me for anything. Just me saying hello to her.
Right.
Just like tore her up in her spirit. Yeah. And that's what we have to do. We have to recognize, each other, and just allow for God to do, what he does best in all of us, which is to shine, if we allow for that to happen.
Exactly. Right? Exactly.
And so overseas, here in the US, God's going to do what he does as long as we allow for him to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very, very well said. And you answered it very well. And I knew you would. I just had a feeling. I said, there's something in there. Because, Keith and I touched on it, but it didn't come out in my spirit to say, let's really drill down on that and focus on, because he said he did like 2 years of missionary work overseas in the West Indies after college before he said, okay, let me go back to the States get an advanced degree and start doing regular work. So, but I didn't feel it in my spirit at that time to say, hey, wait a minute, let's drill down on those 2 years, you know. But when I was talking to you, it just kind of, you know, I felt it kind of strong. With my interviews, there are certain questions, I call them Oprah questions, that I ask at the end, because I feel that we're kind of heading at the end. I mean, I'm willing to hang out, but I don't like to impose on my guests. But here's one of my Oprah questions, which is, let's just say that you're really being pressed beyond what you normally bounce back on. Like, it's just all your triggers are hitting all on the same day, and you've prayed and you're doing your best to deal, but you're being taken to that place. What do you do to really center yourself, get your feet back on the ground, and get back in the game?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And that happens. For me, it's really in trusting that God knows exactly what he is doing. And for me to trust and rely on that and believe that, what's happening right now, as hard as this might be, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, that God knows everything that we're all going through, and just to trust in his will. And so that's what I do. I ground myself in my faith. I take a deep breath, and I pray.
Mhm.
And I just meditate on, the things of God, and understand that things happen for a reason. If and when it looks like something's not working out, is it time for us to do something different?
What I try to do with my ministry, when I talk to people individually, I know what it's like when you add it all up and it doesn't equate. You say the scriptures, you do what you do, and you still feel terribly, and you still are not sure if you're going to make it. Yeah. And those are the ones I try to help, and just say, look, I know how you feel. I've been there. I go through stuff right now. All I can tell you is it will get better. Please hang in there. If you need to call me, call this other person. But I do not criticize that person for struggling, because all of us struggle. I mean, Jesus had a rough time in Gethsemane. Is there anything that you thought I might have brought up, or were hoping I was gonna, or there's something you want to bring up that you want to share that I didn't think to ask?
I would say, for folks not to be afraid to call on that name, Jesus, where they can get that deliverance. And when they're going through their darkest times, not to be afraid to call on that name of Jesus, because there's power in that name.
Oh, yeah.
And I just had this conversation, Todd, with one of the folks that go to our church today, because she was telling me about a hard time that she had, during the week. And then she said, and what I did was, she said, I just prayed. I said, you did the thing that you needed to do, because that by sometimes just calling on that name brings so much peace, to our hearts and to our minds and to our spirits. And that's what I would say, Todd. When people are going through, those times, and when they feel like they're really alone, you're not. When they're feeling like, there's no friend that's there to be trusted, God is there. Call on the name of Jesus, trust in God, lean on him, and then let God show you, how he works in his timing, because there'll be someone that might be there. It might be you, Todd.
Okay.
It might be someone else, but God will send someone, to be there, for that one.
Very beautifully said. And I will say this, and this comes from somebody who was born and raised Jewish. I still consider myself Jewish, but I always say I have a relationship with Christ, and I do. There is power in the name Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I've testified to it before, and I think it's gotten cut out of here. And we've been on, so all I'm gonna say is it does do things. I've personally experienced it, where you throw that name into it and it does change things. And it's just really interesting, because there's no J in the Hebrew alphabet. And yet Jewish people are called Jews, and there's no J. There's no J in the Hebrew alphabet. So that's where that whole thing comes in of Yahweh became Jehovah. Mm-hmm. There's no Jehovah in the Hebrew Bible. It's Yahweh. because
Yeah.
there's no J, but
Right.
yet the J is the word that represents Jews, and then Jesus is J, but that's why people say Jesus, Yeshua. That's how that whole thing comes about.
Yeah.
This is what I used to do as a religion major. I'm an intellectual, so I'm fascinated by that stuff. But this is where I messed up. That intellect, which comes out of your ego, it sounds great. It likes to satisfy itself and be smart. But what does that ego do for you when your father is dying of cancer, when you've been up all night and had 1 hour of sleep and you don't know how you're going to get through the day? That intellect is not going to serve you. So there has to be a faith life of some kind. You have to believe in something that's bigger than you, because there is something bigger than you. And if you open yourself up to it, you will see it. You will encounter it.
I've been blessed, in a way that opportunities have been presented to me, afforded to me, that I was able to, complete 4 years of undergrad and then go to school again and then go to school again and then go to school again. So I have several degrees, Todd.
Mhm.
But just like Paul said, that's all dung to me, because without having the relationship that I have with God, it actually really turns out to mean nothing, because it's so temporal,
Right.
right? And a relationship that we have with God is supposed to be, and is, because he makes it everlasting.
You're Yankee and you're Caucasian. You just generally, you're not raised in that strong faith type environment.
Mhm.
It is more common, what I've seen, it is more common in African American families,
Yeah.
but it's very common in the South, regardless of your race or culture,
Right. Right.
to have that. So I think because of that, I had a much more of a stubborn nature.
Mhm.
It's very common in Jewish culture to question and debate. We have books, the Talmud and the Mishnah, which came about because all the top people, the leadership, the rabbis, would argue about what is called the Old Testament.
Mhm.
And they would argue about one word in one sentence, in
Yeah.
one chapter. And they would write an entire chapter on a word and debate it to the point where you're like, but that's our tradition. You read the Old Testament and you hear that the Jews by nature and the Israelites were stiff-necked, stubborn people.
Mhm.
It's kind of built into the tradition. To be a Jew, you're supposed to learn Torah on your own.
Mm.
You're supposed to have a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, and you're supposed to challenge God, as Jacob did, and the prophets did, and
Mhm.
there's nothing bad about that. Job was the ultimate one that challenged God, but even he said, no matter what I do, I cannot diminish him.
Right.
I'm complaining, but if he doesn't want to change things, he doesn't have to.
Yeah.
But Job did kind of go at God and say, why are you doing this? Whereas
Mhm.
I don't think there's any book in the New Testament where anyone does that. I mean, the closest Jesus ever came to that was on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? But other than that, I think that it's much more of a passive, submissive type of approach in the Christian tradition as opposed to the Jewish one. And it
Mhm.
also explains certain things too, as far as why so many of the Jews rejected the ministry of Jesus and didn't immediately embrace it. Just like Paul says with those who followed Jesus after his death,
Mhm.
they were grafted on.
Right.
And I feel in a lot of ways that I was grafted on to that kind of a tradition because I started out in a different tradition.
Yeah.
And so I still consider myself Jewish, but I have a relationship with Christ. I didn't just find Jesus. I journeyed and I journeyed and I talked and I read and I listened and
Mhm.
and I went everywhere that I felt compelled to go.
Yeah.
And then in the course of that, gravitated towards certain things more than I did others. So you mentioned Pentecostal earlier, and I ended up in an all-black Pentecostal ministry down here
Mhm.
shortly after I moved here. And I live in Raleigh, but the ministry I was led to was in Franklinton, which is about 20 minutes outside of Raleigh. It's a very small town. When I try to explain to people, if you want to get a sense of who I am, take it like this. I'm a Caucasian Jew from New York, born and raised, and I ended up in an all-Black Pentecostal ministry in Franklinton, North Carolina. So that should tell you that I'm definitely a seeker and that I have an open heart, and wherever that wisdom comes from and wherever I am loved is where I'm going to go.
Even if there was no heaven, just think of the life that we live in honor of God, in love, compassion, and forbearance, and long suffering, so that we could show forth the love of God to one another.
Right.
And what that does in people's lives, the impact that has on, even if there was no heaven. I do believe that there's a place, because God said there was a place that was prepared for us. So I'm looking forward to that. But even if that did not exist, just living my life this way brings so much peace and so much love from my heart to others, that I'm blessed just by that alone. But I am also looking for that reward in the end, right? That we will be with him, one day into eternity.
You can bring somebody to Bible study and church, but if they're not really invested in it,
right,
then what good is it? But for those children who were really introduced to it at a young age, I mean, they're so blessed, because so many of the things that the world does to you and so much of what the world throws at you, it won't penetrate as deeply, and you'll be a lot more resilient against it, as opposed to someone like me who had already experienced so much difficulties, because I was always a sensitive guy. And I mean, I didn't let people know when I was younger, of course, but I was always a very sensitive individual, and words and actions hurt. I didn't have the coping skills. And because I didn't have that religious foundation, that real connection with my higher power, I just suffered with it. And so what ultimately led me to the Lord, which is post-graduation, like I said, I'm a religion major, but what led me to the Lord was being 24, knowing already at 24 that I was an old soul, and feeling tired in my spirit, even at 24, saying, I can't even enjoy what I have right now. Here I'm young, I'm healthy, I love my girlfriend, she's with me, my mom's still young, everyone I grew up with is pretty much still alive and healthy. And, other than losing my dad at a very young age, I was 21, but, I should have been in a better place, and I knew something wasn't right. And so my journey with God really took a long time. I think when you're raised up at a young age, you get there a little faster, and then all the damage that can be done to you doesn't happen as acutely if you have that prayer life at an early age, which I did not have. So, I wrote about this in my book. I wrote a book, now it's been probably about 6 months ago, and I have it on my website, thehopefulaspirant.com. And the book is called The Hopeful Aspirant, My Journey of Faith. And it goes over the 30 years, my journey, spiritual journey of 30 years. And it gets into what led me to that place, and some of the things that I've gone through, and the epiphanies that I've had, and a lot of the ups and downs. And, just like talking to you earlier, Bobbie, I mean, I've had a lot of downs, and I think the reason that they hit me so hard is because I did not have that original foundation. I acquired it later on. So I can say this, no matter what happens to me after this moment, if I have 3 more nights where I don't sleep, it doesn't mean I don't have faith. It doesn't mean I don't believe in God. Right. I'm just being tormented and attacked. It doesn't discount the fact that I've witnessed things, that I've experienced on a personal level, the hand of God in my own life. And I've seen it, in the birth of my child and just different things. So I absolutely believe in everything you said and everything we're talking about. And I just always pray to God that I can be a living testimony, because I have really walked this walk, and it wasn't given to me. I went after it, and I had to discover it for myself. And in order to I had to undo a lot. I had to undo a lot in me, and I didn't realize that. And so there had to be an undoing, and God had to kind of knock down my walls, and even now I think he's still doing that. It has been a true honor to have you on the show. Keith is very blessed, and so are you, to have each other. The people of God, we need to be strong, and we need to stay together.
Yes.
And support each other. So I really appreciate you being here and giving me that support and supporting the show, as well as the viewers.
Todd, thank you so much for having me. And, God bless your work, and God extend his hand towards it so that it will continue to be prosperous.
To my viewers, this is Todd Rheingold, the Hopeful Aspirant. Let's all aspire to reach higher and stay inspired. God bless.